Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads. Hey everybody, how's it going this week? Hope you all are doing well. Welcome to the Drum Shuffle. Jamie Eads joining you as always. This is episode 26. Today we will be joined by the great Robb Ryan up in Canada, a master educator, a fantastic soloist. He does lots of great work up there in his hometown. You're going to learn a whole lot from today's episode, I think, so please stay tuned. Los Cabos drumsticks may be the best-kept secret from drummers today. Los Cabos drumsticks makes the finest tools to touch a drummer's hands in the business. The best news, almost every popular stick size is available in both white hickory and red hickory. If you don't know what red hickory is, it's made from the heartwood of the hickory tree, unlike regular white hickory, which is made from sapwood. Red hickory drumsticks will hold up to even the hardest hitting drummers. Their durability comes from the density of the wood, but they do not sacrifice the feel. Please visit LosCabosDrumsticks.com to learn more about their products. And don't forget to ask at your favorite retailer for Los Cabos drumsticks. All right, guys, as I mentioned, we're going to be joined today by the great Robb Ryan. Robb is a fantastic educator up in Canada. Robb and I are both Dream Cymbals and Los Cabos drumsticks artists. That's how our paths crossed. But I asked Robb to come on because he is just such an incredible educator. I knew that we would all learn a ton of good information from Robb. I want to encourage everybody to go check out his lesson that he did for the fine folks at Drumeo out in Vancouver. Just a phenomenal player. I can't say that enough times. So without further ado, let's welcome the great Robb Ryan to the Drum Shuffle. Good evening, Robb. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, buddy.
Good. Hey, man, thanks for taking time and coming on the Drum Shuffle. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, man, I appreciate you having me on. It's my pleasure.
Absolutely. Robb, what we typically do is we start at the very beginning. Tell our listeners how you got into drumming.
Yeah, I think my story is a lot like, a lot of guys that I hear on the podcast, playing on the pots and pans at like age 2 type of thing.
Yeah.
And, I grew up in I don't want to say a musical family because neither one of my parents played an instrument, but they always had music on. And, I got from a very young age, I was listening to everything from Sandy Nelson to Buddy Rich Big Band to straight ahead country and classic rock and all that type of stuff. So it was kind of like, I had like this really varied musical influence even at a really young age. And then when I was 4 or 5, my mom tried to find somebody that would teach me, and nobody would take a kid that age.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was 6 that my mom found this woman teacher about 20 minutes away from us that would actually take a 6-year-old kid. So, I studied with her for, 5 or 6 years or something. And then we moved away, and, that was, I guess I got the bug real early, right?
Yeah.
But it was cool because my original teacher, she was like, super into rudiments, and she made me play on a practice pad for a full year before I could get a drum kit. And I think that laid an awesome foundation for, what I do now.
Sure, absolutely. Well,
yeah.
I think there's 2 paths, and the more and more that I talk to other drummers and especially some of my favorite drummers I've been lucky enough to have on the show, there's 2 paths for everybody. And it's either you immediately start into lessons and learning how to read and rudiments, or you're throwing on the Kiss record or the Led Zeppelin record and banging away on your first kit, right? I mean, it's... Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think I kind of did it backwards, from a way a lot of my friends did it, because I obviously did the lesson route right away. But then when I was like, say 11, 12 years old, I stepped away from lessons for a while, and all that I did was played along to like my favorite kind of, I guess, would have been vinyl at that time and some cassettes. And you know, because at that age, you start to kind of blossom into like your own kind of personal preferences for music. And that's really all I wanted to do. So yeah, it was like the Kiss, you know, Kiss Alive. I was playing along to Peter Criss's stuff. And, you know, and eventually, you know, as the teenage years kicked in, it became Metallica and, you know, and then the grunge era happened, and then it was Alice in Chains and Primus. And then, you know, eventually I ended up going back for more lessons. But I think I kind of did it backwards in that I took all these lessons and then I applied everything that I had to playing my favorite music versus the way some guys do it, where they try to just figure it out from playing their favorite music. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, and I was the kid that, you know, begged my mom for the drums until I got them, and then put on the Kiss and Motley Crue and Led Zeppelin records and learned to play that way, you know, and
sure.
And, you know, after you've been playing 25, 30 years like I have, you know, I look back now and say, gosh, I wish I had taken the other path, you know, so that I wouldn't have some of the terrible habits that I have now and all that stuff.
Yeah, but, you know, on the other side of it, you learned how to play music first.
Well, that's
right?
true.
And I think,
yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in today's day and age where, you know, we have Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, a lot of guys forget that, you know, the drums are a musical instrument and it's not just about the drum. You know what I mean? And I hear that complaint from a lot of guys, right? And most people nowadays, I mean, they don't even want to play with a band. They don't know what it's like to drive a band. You know, like all the way through high school, I played in concert band and jazz band and the big band. And I learned in high school how to drive a band. Right. And I don't think there's a lot of guys, man, that just don't know how to do that these days.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think there's good and bad from both paths starting out for sure.
Absolutely. For sure, man.
You know, but when I was a kid, it was like the only way you were going to make it. There was no internet when I started playing the drums, you know, I mean,
me either.
You're right. So, I mean, the only way to make it as a drummer was in a band. Kind of thing.
That's right.
You know, so it was just, I guess, the natural progression for me.
Yep.
Now, so you said jazz band and, you know, concert band and all that. So
yeah.
I'm assuming you, you know, through your middle school, high school years, you were doing drumline and all those kind of things, right?
Well, no drumline, because I'm from Canada, and believe it or not, man, drumline is not popular here at all.
Really?
Okay. No, not at all. Like it's such an anomaly with how big it is in the U.S. It's not big here at all. In the area that I grew up, let's say, 10 high schools, there was one high school that actually had a marching band.
Wow. Okay. Well,
yeah, it's not a big thing here.
Well, okay, so let me ask the dumb question. You know, I mean,
Sure.
I've got tons and tons of Canadian friends, but, you know, I'm guessing that, you know, American football, you know, obviously is way down the list next to hockey. Does that have anything to do with the fact that there's not many marching bands in Canada that hockey is?
Probably.
I mean, you know, I never would have made that connection unless you said that, right?
Yeah, no, I would assume, and I didn't make that connection until you just said that, but you're probably right, man. Yeah, because, I mean, hockey just doesn't have the halftime show, right?
Right.
You know, so, but yeah, it's just not a popular thing here. And I remember being in high school and wanting to transfer to the one high school that had the marching band, but it just wasn't feasible. You know, it was, 45-minute drive or whatever it was away from where I live for me to go to that school. So it just wasn't feasible for me to get there.
Gotcha. Well, so in your formative years, you know, when you were, you know, first starting to, you know, play along with records and things like that, you said you kind of went back to lessons again. And of course, you're known as a great educator. So, I mean, obviously you've had tons and tons of formal training. You know, and I know that you're, you know, dare I say, one of the experts in the masterful Gary Chaffee realm, you know, all of his stuff. So who were your influences during this time? I mean, you mentioned Metallica and kind of the grunge era, but are there...
Yeah, and I mean, and that was like, you know, until I was about 17. And then, so once I figured out who Vinnie Colaiuta was...
Oh, here we go,
yeah, so... You know, Vinny has had more of an impact on my playing through the years than anybody else. And it's not because of his amazing chops. It's because of his amazing mind. And, I had gotten into like Dave Weckl and Steve Gadd and some of these like, drummers. And I kept reading about this guy, Vinny Colaiuta, in Modern Drummer. And as we mentioned, the internet just wasn't there, right? So you couldn't just jump on YouTube. I mean, drummers now don't even realize how great they have it.
Oh, no doubt.
You hear about a guy, you jump on YouTube, you can just go look at him, right? But,
right.
I mean, I grew up in a small city. The record store didn't carry anything that Vinny Colaiuta played on. I couldn't get my hands on this, but I kept reading about this cat, right? So the Buddy Rich Memorial Scholarship video, which I'm sure you and every one of your listeners is very well aware of, and if they're not, they should definitely check it out. The one in specific, I had a friend of mine lend me the VHS tape that was Dave Weckl, Steve Gadd, Vinny Colaiuta, and Vinny came out, and I was just like, who the hell? Like, I've read about this guy, but who plays like this?
Yeah.
And that led me into kind of like delving down that rabbit hole of who did he study with? And that's what got me into the Gary Chaffee stuff. Because then I found out that, he spent a year with Gary Chaffee at Berkeley. And, he had studied with Alan Dawson, and so he knew all of his rudiments. And I had done that, like I mentioned, with my first teacher. So I'm like, okay, I've got a grasp of that. Now, who's this Gary Chaffee guy, right?
Right.
So I went out and I bought all 4 of the pattern series. And I remember looking at these books and being just so confused. I don't know if you're familiar with the books or not.
I am.
They're all, okay. They're very difficult.
They are. And when I was, in my formative years, I'm going to tell a quick story, but when I was in my formative years, some of the older guys, here in the music scene, the drummers that I looked up to that were on the local scene, I remember 2 or 3 of them got together, and I think they made it to like page 4 in one of those books,
Right.
Well, and they were like, okay, that's as far as we can get today, kind of thing.
Yeah. And that's it, man. Those books are so hard. But the thing is with the Gary Chaffee books is that rhythm and meter patterns and sticking patterns, as an example, they're written 90% just for snare drum.
Right.
And then Gary says, oh, you can do this or you could do that. But I mean, here I am, like an 18, 19-year-old kid, and I could read the material because my first teacher taught me how to read really, really well. So I could read the material, but I didn't know what the hell to do with it. So, a year or 2 later, Gary then came out with 2 VHS tapes. And I bought them immediately because I was still fascinated with what Vinny was doing and how, and Steve Smith, too, is another one. And I knew that they both studied with Gary, so I was like, I need to figure this stuff out. So I watched these VHS tapes, and everything just clicked. I'm like, oh, my God, I get it now. So I understood what to do with the material.
Right. So the practical application is where the rubber met the road, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm proud to say that I've worked through almost every page of all of his books at this point. Not to say that I can apply all of it, but I can read it, I can play it, but it's some of it is not applicable material to any kind of music. That's for sure. Some of it's pretty out there. Right.
Well, but when you learn, I guess when you learn those sticking patterns, it may not be applicable to any music that you're going to be playing on a bandstand, but it certainly builds a certain muscle memory and a certain capability within you as a player.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, just as an example, knowing how to subdivide 5 against 3. Okay, and I can play polyrhythms within polyrhythms has certainly helped my sense of time when I play some funk or a shuffle.
Right.
Right, because I'm that aware of the internal pulse of where 4 is, even when subdividing a polyrhythm within a polyrhythm in 4/4 time, you have to be so aware of where that pulse is that nothing is wavering ever.
Right. Well,
so it's definitely improved my sense of time. There's no doubt.
It will absolutely. And I think the guys that studied Gary's methods. Okay. So you mentioned YouTube. I can get on YouTube and watch a guy playing a drum solo that's just amazing. And it's, highly technical, but you don't you don't feel the pulse. The guys that grew up in that Chaffee, tradition, you can always feel the pulse no matter how crazy the solo gets, right? I mean,
I agree. I totally agree with that.
So, I mean, it's not just about chops. It's about, showcasing the chops, but still being a rhythmic instrument, Oh,
100% it is. Yeah. I mean, his books challenge your mind so much. And if you don't have a solid sense of where the pulse is, you will fall flat on your face all the time.
Yeah, 100%.
Any one of his snare drum etudes, you will literally fall flat on your face.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it.
But it's fun stuff, man. It's super fun material.
Well, so, I guess the next question is, of course, you're teaching a lot. Yep. I mean, are all of your students working through those books, or are...
No. Honestly, man, I've got a couple of guys that, we are working through some of the Chaffee material, but, I think what it did for me is it made me realize at a pretty young age how important, just as an example, and actually I'm going to reference to Mark Giuliano's book too. I don't know if you're familiar with his book, but he's got a section at the beginning that he calls the loop, and, he's basically saying this is the most important thing that you're going to learn, and it's going back and forth between eighth notes, triplets, and 16. And so, I mean, I learned through Gary Chaffee material how important knowing your subdivisions are. So I use that as a basis, even with my beginner students, right? Because if you think about that, as you start to learn Afro-Cuban music, well, I mean, what do those guys do? There's 3/2 polyrhythms all over the place. If you trace it back to African roots, there's tons of 4/3 polyrhythms or 3/4 polyrhythms, and they're dividing the line between eighth notes and triplets, and you need to be able to play, say you're playing a mambo pattern and you want to drop into 6/8, they do it all the time. So you need to have those subdivisions so dialed in to be able to do that. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I spend a lot of time on subdivisions with my students, tons. And I've seen great results with it.
Well, I mean, that's awesome because, there's a lot of, I'm not trying to say anything bad about anybody, but there are a lot of guys that can't do that. I mean, down here in Kentucky where I'm at, it's a lot of shuffle stuff, and you can always tell the guys that really know how to shuffle and then the guys that are faking it till they make it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So
absolutely, man.
And it's all about how you're subdividing that. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the other things that I really, really stress in my teaching, just if we're talking about shuffles, I was taught this ride cymbal pattern by one of my previous teachers, and I will have my students sit down. We will put the metronome at 120, and at 120, that is an eighth note of a triplet. So you're playing at 40 beats a minute, and I have them count it out. Triplet, triplet. And on the downbeat, you're dropping your stick, and on the let, you're lifting.
Right.
And you want to see something that's going to improve your time?
Yeah.
Try that exercise, man. 5 minutes a day, your time will round out so fast, it's not even funny.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a great technique and a great method to teach that stuff. That's awesome.
Well, and it really is. And I'll tell you one thing that it really does. And here's, you can tell when a guy can shuffle or play jazz time or whatever, when they are putting as much emphasis on the skip beat as they are the downbeat, you know that they're not a real good player. But the method that I'm talking about, because you're lifting on the let, so that stick is just touching the ride cymbal coming up, you're literally driving the band with the quarter note, and that let of the triplet, the skip note, is half the volume. Your groove improves like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, you can just put on any ZZ Top record and, I mean, Frank Beard was the master at all that stuff, the Texas Shuffle. And I mean, it's just a machine when he shuffles.
Absolutely. But see, these are the subtleties that I get into in my teaching because most guys don't even notice that. Like they just think, oh, I'm playing a shuffle. I got to play, the first and third partials of a triplet. They don't think about the internal microdynamics of their own playing.
Right. Well, I mean, it's how you learn to do it. It's okay. I can play this. I'm going to do it. You don't give it much thought beyond that, and
Exactly.
I was very fortunate. I was able to have Jason Smay on the show, a few weeks back. And I mean, you want to talk about the master of the shuffle, from JD McPherson's band. I mean, that guy's just a beast, and he talked about that. He was like, when I was a little kid, man, I would just sit in my bedroom and play shuffle stuff on a pillow, at night,
right.
and look at him now. Right. I mean,
yeah.
But it is something that you definitely have to work on. There's no questioning that. It's something you have to work every day to get better at, I agree. As with anything,
I completely agree, man.
So, Rob, you mentioned Mark Juliana. I saw a great video of you using one of his techniques. I think it's called the drop technique. And you did it with nothing but paradiddles around the kit. It was really cool, man. And I had never really thought about applying it that way. But so I'm assuming Mark is somebody that you follow pretty closely.
Yeah, I kind of came across Mark, I want to say about a year and a half ago. And it was, just one of those names that I kept hearing or I kept reading about, like Mark Juliana. And I'm like, who the hell is this guy, right? And then, I don't know, I found him online. And like the first time I saw him play, I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't get it. And I mean, like, I'm a high level player and I'm watching him and I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, it's just, my head wasn't there. Cause I think, I was still like in super chops mode. And the more I watched him, the more I was like, man, but he's so musical and his touch is there. And I don't know. I just really started to dig him more and more and more. And like, now I would say he's probably my favorite player. And, I'm humble enough to say that like my head just wasn't in the right place to actually understand him the first time that I heard him.
Right.
But now I get him. I like him.
Yeah. I was the same way the first time I heard Benny Greb. I mean, somebody was like, you need to check out Benny Greb. And I did. And I was like, I mean, he grooves well. I'm not, same thing. I wasn't getting it. And the more and more I watched his playing, I was like, man, this dude gets it.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, sometimes your head's just not in the right place, right? I mean,
right.
Like the first time I heard Mark, I was preparing to go out to Drumeo to do some live lessons. And it was like really, very choppy, very drumistic. So that's just where my head was at. So to understand what Mark was doing on a 4-piece drum kit with 2 cymbals and, playing with dynamics and different rates and just the way that he plays with rates, which was, different than the way I was doing it at the time, and his orchestrations and stuff, I just really didn't get it. My head just wasn't there. And that's on me. But hey, I get him now, so...
Right. Well, he's an amazing player. There's no doubt about it. And, you mentioned Drumeo and, that's when I pull up YouTube, it's kind of like automatic. I got to go see what Drumeo has put up here in the last week or so,
Sure.
Because it's a great place for drummers to go and just check out really cool stuff, I mean,
oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure it is, man.
I can lose an afternoon on their YouTube page or whatever.
Oh my God. No kidding.
Yeah. But they have just a fantastic studio out there. And, I checked out, your solo that you did out there at Drumeo and, real tasty stuff.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But just some of the ostinatos and the patterns and the odd time, the odd meter that, I think you were playing 5 against 3 at one point. And
well, okay. So ironically, the whole thing is in 4.
Okay.
And yeah,
well, there you go. You've already blown my mind. So go.
Yeah, no, the whole thing is in 4, and I'll just I'll break it down real fast for if anybody wants to check it out and just refer back to my breakdown. So The opening ostinato is a 5-note grouping with my left hand, but it is 8 notes. Phrased, so it takes 5 bars to come around.
Okay.
My bass drum is in 3, in 16th notes against that. Then it goes to a grouping of 3 with my left hand, again in 8th notes, which then goes to an ostinato in 3 and 16th notes with my feet. But the whole thing is in 4. It just takes bars to cycle back around. And the reason why I did it that way, of course, I mean, you can think of it in an odd time, but then, of course, the polyrhythms that I play against it become really wonky to think about. So if you're thinking about it in 4, it's just a lot easier to think of where the internal pulse is for those polyrhythms.
So eventually everything comes back around and meshes at some point in the cycle.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Well, so, it's not something that I would ever attempt. I mean, I play like a caveman, honestly, I mean, but
yeah, but that's, you know what, man, we all have our strengths at the instrument. I mean, there's lots of guys that say that they play like a caveman, but they groove like crazy. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you're a drummer, and that's what's going to get you hired. Ostinatos in 5 and 3 against 4 are not going to get you hired. So, do what you do, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, everybody has a place. I mean, I've always believed that. It's just, it amazes me when I see guys like you that, if you told me, okay, Drumeo called, they want you out in their studio and they want you to do your best solo. Right. I wouldn't be able to say afterwards, okay, here's what I just did.
Right.
Here's how to break down the solo I just played. It would, it would just be, okay, I'm going to cycle through chops, basically,
Sure. Well, I mean, but that's because of my education background and doing the Chaffee stuff. I mean, I can look at my Drumeo solo, and I mean, most of it was off the cuff. I mean, obviously I worked out the ostinatos prior to.
Right.
But it was improvised. Anything that's in there, I mean, if you asked me what was that you just played, I could tell you the exact sticking what it was and what, that was exactly this. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, I just know, I guess I know my own playing that well that I can do that.
Right.
So, I mean, which is kind of a blessing and a curse. And this is where, getting into the whole Mark Juliana thing, I'm trying to get away from that. And I've spent like the last year, after I went out to Drumeo, watching myself, I had spent so long preparing for that. I watched it and I went, meh, kind of sick of that guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Trust me, I do.
Yeah. So I've literally spent like the last year or so, like kind of reinventing myself. I play a much smaller kit now. I've tried to step away from like those stock chops, so to speak. But even like those stock chops, I'm trying to use them in different ways, right? But yeah, I just got really sick of my own playing, and I think we all get to that level, right? Where it's like I don't like the way I play anymore.
Yeah, and I think all players go through that. I mean, not even just drummers, but, guitarists, piano players, whatever your instrument may be.
Of course.
I think everybody gets into some sort of playing rut. It's how you, I think it's how you react to that rut that, that decides a lot of how it's going to turn out for you, right? I mean, you gotta,
I agree.
You got to fight through that stuff. And, you're lucky in the sense that your students are still going to be showing up every day for their lesson, right? And so you're going to have to sit there and play and think about drums. Whereas, a guy like me, if I get, sick of the way I'm playing, I might just set the sticks down for 3 or 4 weeks, which ultimately isn't good for me, No,
and having said that, though, I mean, when I came back from Drumeo, I don't think I touched my sticks, like outside of teaching and, the odd gig. Like, I didn't actually sit down and practice for a while. What I did do was I got on YouTube a whole bunch and just started studying a bunch of different guys and trying to figure out where I wanted to take my playing.
Right.
And so it really became, kind of just a mental lesson. And I think it was good because it allowed me to clear my own head. But which also, of course, allowed me to take in new information and, start to understand guys like Mark Juliana. get myself in that different headspace. Why is he popular? Why do people like him? What am I missing? What am I not getting? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
how am I not understanding? And so, excuse me, taking, a couple of weeks off from actually practicing did me a lot of good.
Yeah, and sometimes it does. Yeah,
for sure, man.
Just to be able to control, alt, delete your own your own inner
Exactly.
critic. It's good stuff for sure.
No, absolutely. So,
yeah, well, and not only, are you going out and doing the Drumeo stuff and you're teaching all these kids, but, I know that you get quite a few calls, up there in your local scene saying, hey, Robb's a guy that we can call. Our drummer has the flu or, sprained his ankle or whatever the case may be. But I know that you get a lot of calls for fill-in gigs and things like that. So it's not just that you're always, face down in a book studying really, esoteric, sticking patterns and stuff like that. You get out and play as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I've caught some videos of you in like, singer-songwriter type things, where you're just playing time. So, I always ask the question of my really gifted technical guests, when you go out and play a singer-songwriter kind of gig, is that just completely boring for you or do you like it?
I think if it's good music, I like it a lot. You have to find the challenge in whatever it is that you're doing. Like, obviously, I'm not going to start dropping quintuplets and, subdividing polyrhythms when I'm playing with a singer-songwriter, but I have to be 100% focused on my groove.
Right.
And my own microdynamics. Right? I mean, if I get called to do a studio gig, I want that to be a first or second take. So I need to, put all my concentration in and have fun with it, right? If I'm bored with it, then I'm not going to get called back.
Right. Well, and that's, I think that's the key is that you always want to get called back, right?
Well, this is it.
I mean,
I absolutely do.
If your tax forms depend on on the income that drumming provides, you always want that callback, no doubt about it. But
absolutely,
my point of kind of going down that line of questioning is, when I watch you with a singer-songwriter, your groove is great, and I think a lot of people immediately assume, okay, this is a guy that's a professional educator. He's a Gary Chaffee expert, He's not going to just go play four on the floor with a singer-songwriter kind of thing, or it's not going to sound natural. And, I think if you can wear both of those hats well, which you do, that takes a special kind of player, I think.
Well, I did mention at the beginning that Vinny has had a huge impact on my playing. And the one thing that I've always loved about Vinny is that if you listen to him with Sting, his groove is as solid as anything that you're ever going to get. But, when it's time to solo, he can throw down like anybody.
Absolutely.
And that has always had an impact on me that, number one, you need to be able to groove like crazy. Number two with Vinny is the fact that he can sit in any musical style and sound authentic.
Yeah.
And then lastly, of course, there's Vinny's mind and his ability to solo. So I always, from the time I started listening to Vinny Colaiuta, I decided that number one, my groove has to be really good. But more importantly, if I get a phone call for a blues gig, I need to be able to go in and anybody that's watching me go, yeah, he's a good blues drummer. And then if a metal guy calls me, I need to be able to go in and then they go, wow, man, that guy's a really good metal player. And, jazz is the same. Like if I go play with a jazz trio, people say, yeah, he's a great jazz drummer. They don't know that I just played a metal gig 2 weeks ago.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I don't need to prove that to them. But at some point, they might see me doing something else and go, holy geez, this guy can play everything.
Right. Well, and being a well-rounded player in this day and age, if you're a drummer, you've got to be able to do all those different genres justice. I mean, it's, when I get a studio session call, it may be a country band today, it could be a hard rock group tomorrow. And
you know what? That's it's funny that you say that because I guess it was back in September, I was doing these gigs with this, you know, kind of high profile country guy here in Ontario. And, you know, we played the Saturday night. We had a big show and, you know, fairly big production. And, you know, first thing Sunday morning, I was in the studio doing almost like a Dream Theater-esque like metal album.
That's awesome.
And it was like, you know, slide into one and into the other. Like, you know, and I basically first or second took everything with the metal band and, you know, played a killer country show the night before.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, that's huge. And, you know, I mean, we had Rod Morgenstein on the other night, you know, one of my all-time favorite drummers. And, you know, he had just wrapped up a tour with the Dixie Dregs and then was getting ready to go do a couple of shows with Winger. Those are two very different gigs.
Very different. Very.
And he even said, you know, I try to be authentic in each situation. And, you know, he said, it's just like changing a hat. You know, I have to think a different way, you know, with each gig. But, you know, for guys that are doing this often enough, you're going to have to do a little bit of everything and do it well, you know?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
I say that all the time, you know, be prepared when you know, any gig, any studio session, be prepared to play with a click. You're going to have to do it. You know, don't rely on your internal metronome.
No.
You're going to have to play with a click sooner or later, and you're going to have to play that style of music well with a click.
That's right. And most guys are afraid of the click, and, you know, they have to get used to it and just think of it as another member of the band. I mean, that's the way I think of it. Whether, you know, some of the gigs I play, you know, maybe I'm playing with backing tracks, so I have a click in my in-ears along with backing tracks. I just think of that click track as one of the members of the band.
Right. Who never messes up.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, you can't, like, a lot of guys are so afraid of it, so they automatically have their defense mechanisms up and they fight the click track and their time's all over the place. You know, you wouldn't do that if that was just a bass player playing perfect. You would play along with that bass player.
Right.
So, you know, if you look at the click track as just another instrument in the band, you know, it's the guy playing cowbell who doesn't ever lose time. Perfect. I'm following him. You know?
Exactly. I'm going to follow the guy that has perfect time. That's a good way to look at it, Rob. Man, that's see the stuff we learn on the Drum Shuffle, right?
Exactly.
Cool. Well, so Rob, tell us a little bit about, you know, your teaching schedule. You know, I don't know how many folks I have listening up in Canada. I know I've got a few at least, but are you doing any kind of, you know, Skype lessons or anything like that as well?
No, I don't do any Skype lessons. I kind of started to advertise Skype lessons, and I really, you know, I had a few guys inquire, and then I don't know. I just never really got into it. All of my students are, I would say, within a 2-hour radius of where I live. I have a lot of guys that come from out of town, you know, and they'll come in like once a month or once every other week type of thing, and they'll do an hour or two with me, and I'll just load them full of stuff, and, you know, off they go. I have a bunch of beginners, and usually they come through word of mouth, right? They're not generally, you know, from advertising, because I don't really advertise. Most of it is just word of mouth. But, you know, I pull from a fairly large geographical radius.
That's cool. I mean, that's great.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, a lot of them are more advanced, or at least, you know, high level, intermediate to advanced. I have a couple of guys that are, you know, college music performance grads and whatnot. So, yeah, I've run the full gamut, I suppose.
Sure. Well, you know, you mentioned that you have a lot of beginners, and this is just me being curious, you know, because it's been so long since I've given a drum lesson. You know, when you have the beginner students come to you, what are the kids wanting to do these days? You know, I mean, back when I was, you know, teaching some younger guys, they would come in and say, "Oh, I really want to learn this, you know, Green Day song or whatever it was, you know, or I want to learn to play a Tool song or whatever." What are the kids asking to learn to play these days?
Not that. That's for sure. I think that's.
Oh, that's funny.
Well, no, I've seen that change too, because, you know, I remember the days where they'd bring in, like, you know, a Blink-182 song, and that's what got them into the drums. And I think now they just want to learn because it looks like fun. They don't really want to play music. And I find most beginners, when you ask them, like, even what is your favorite band or what's your favorite song, they don't even have an answer.
Yeah.
Which is really scary, because I don't think that, like, I know at that age I was listening to music all the time, and I don't think that that's happening now. At least not like it used to when we were young.
Yeah, well, and some of that has to do with just the oversaturation. You know, the crazy, you know, I guess, you know, Spotify with all the streaming services, it's just like you're overloaded with it. You know, it's all just right in front of you all the time.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so easy to click from one song to another. Whereas, you know, I know when I was a young kid, you were either cassette or vinyl, so it wasn't so easy just to go artist to artist to artist to artist. You would actually sit and listen to an album and get acquainted with a band.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of, you know, super successful musicians right now out there that don't release music as an album. They just do singles now, you know,
That's right.
because that's the way we're consuming it. So definitely a change in the music industry. Therefore, I guess that kind of rolls downhill to the instrument educators, you know. So
oh, absolutely. And I mean, I even remember, you know, say being a young teenager, sitting in a chair, you know, you're listening to your favorite album and you're looking at those liner notes. And even cassettes had great liner notes, and you'd know who the musicians were on it. You go, oh, it's so-and-so on drums, and he played on this other album that I had. And then you started to get acquainted with, oh, well, I like his playing on that, and I like his playing on this. And then you start to develop, you know, your favorite players.
yeah.
And I think nowadays a lot of these guys, you know, their favorite players are whoever makes the best YouTube videos. And it's not even who are the best players. It's who's doing the best drum covers, who has the best mix, who has the best light. It has nothing to do with playing ability anymore.
Well, that's a really good point. And, you know, there's kind of a running joke on the show that I use, you know, and I say it takes 30 seconds on Google to find, you know, an 8-year-old kid that can outdrum me. You know, I mean, it's pretty amazing. You know, I mean, everybody's a good player now. But, you know, I think you bring up a really good point in that, you know, it's about the drum covers and, you know, whose camera has the best angle and all that stuff. It's kind of a lost art form, you know, and I don't mean to sound like an old guy saying get off my lawn, but it isn't, you know, it isn't the way it was even 20 years ago. It's way different.
Oh, it's very, very different, which has changed the landscape of teaching completely.
Oh, I'm sure it has.
It really has, you know, because it's very hard, you know, when you have a beginner and you're teaching them, like, you know, their basic drum beats and some basic drum fills, and then they can't even relate that to music. They don't understand that, well, why am I crashing a cymbal when I'm coming back in? Like, well, here, listen to this. You know what I mean?
Right.
Listen to this song. This is a good standard song, and maybe you'll understand, but they have no idea how to relate that back to actual music.
Yeah. Well,
you know, and I don't think, you know, I'm 43. So when I was, you know, obviously growing up, we listened to a ton of music. Like I mentioned, I just understood the language of music.
Yeah.
As, you know, anybody I think that's over the age of 30 probably does, because they grew up with it.
It's a great point. I mean, and I could go on and on for hours about, you know, the drum samples and, you know, snapping stuff to the grid and Pro Tools. And, you know, I mean, I could talk about that, you know, for hours and decry how it's, you know, robbing the soul of our music and all that stuff. But it is a really good point. It's different for kids that are getting into music. They're getting into a different style, not style of music, but a different kind of music than what we were listening to, which was, you know, four dudes in a room cutting a track, right?
Oh yeah, and I mean, and I don't want to sound all negative here. You know, I'll give you one example. I have a female student. She's about 13 years old, relative beginner. And she's actually a very good player. She catches on super quick. I've never given her anything that she just didn't understand. She's going to be a hell of a player, you know, if she sticks with it. But, you know, now it's coming out that, okay, I really like to listen to hip hop. Well, okay, that's great. So my way of relating this now to her is, you know, I asked her right away, have you ever heard of the song Amen Brother? And she said, what the heck is Amen Brother? So I explained to her what the song is, and that the Amen break came from the song Amen Brother, and I wrote it out for her, and I said, here, learn this, because this is probably 90% of your hip-hop.
Yeah.
And it's where drum and bass came from, and we can start to tear this beat apart, but this came from real music.
Yeah, I mean...
And here's the song, right?
Yeah,
so,
right. The hip hop kids should be listening to Clyde Stubblefield and Jabo Starks and John Bonham. I mean, those are the three guys that are most sampled in that music.
Well, the Amen break's actually the most sampled piece of music in music history. It's actually more sampled than the Funky Drummer, believe it or not.
Really? Well, see, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, it is. And I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the Amen break, but Google it, listen to it, and you're going to go, oh my God, I've heard that a gazillion times.
Yeah.
And, I just relate it back. So, when you get these people that are, I like drum and bass, or I like whatever, well, yeah, let's go back to the Amen break. Let's go back to the Funky Drummer. Let's go back to John Bonham. And because, like you said, it's all sampled right from that. So let's go back to the source. And then you understand where your music came from. And at least I can give you a little bit of history.
Sure. Well, and I think the history part of it is what's so important, and just simply because, the way my brain works is when I hear a song or a record that I love, I'm like you, into the liner notes. Okay, who is playing on this? Now let me go find other things that he's played on. And it just kind of, it's the rabbit hole of discovery, right? I mean,
absolutely.
So that's the important part of it, is to learn the historical significance of what you're listening to today. If you can tie it back to something from the 70s or the 60s, and then start exploring that, it makes you a better, well-rounded musician, no doubt about it.
Well, yeah, and it just deepens the rabbit hole. I mean, when you listen to Benny Greb, and then you find out that Benny Greb's influences include, say, Steve Gadd, and Steve Gadd's influences included Tony Williams, and Tony Williams' influences, were Elvin Jones, Max Roach, and on, and then you look at who their influences were, and you find out it was Dave Tuff, and it goes back, and all of a sudden you're like, well, now we're at the beginning of drumming. You know what I mean?
Right. And
it's a huge history lesson, and then you start to discover all this music that maybe you didn't know existed.
Yeah.
But then if you go, say, Benny Greb to Steve Gadd, and all of a sudden you hear, once you've heard Steve Gadd, then you can hear that in Benny Greb. You know what I mean? So you're like, okay, now I understand where he's getting his sound, his feel, his licks. I understand that now.
Yeah.
Right? Vinnie Colaiuta, Tony Williams was a huge influence. And you can, if you know Tony's playing, you can hear Tony's playing right through Vinnie Colaiuta.
Right. And I say it all the time. Every time I see a drummer playing, I'm stealing something to take home with me. And we all,
for sure.
And we all do that, and it's kind of like if you say, this is my favorite drummer, and then you see that he had these 5 influences, you're probably going to hear a mixture of those 5 guys in his or her playing. So,
absolutely.
That's what's so cool about it, is once you hear that and then you go backwards, as we said, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but, when you go backwards through that, you're going to discover a whole lot of cool stuff, no doubt.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely, man.
Yep. Well,
the drum set history is rich, man. There's a lot of good players that came way before us.
Oh, no doubt about that. And, we all aspire to be great, and you have to listen to the greats to get some of that. That's my opinion anyway.
Me too.
Rob, one of our traditions here on the Drum Shuffle, we always ask our guests for a good piece of advice for other drummers or other musicians. And, you are a master educator, so enlighten us with some good advice.
Okay, I'm going to hit on a couple of points. Number one, listen to as much music as you can. Learn the language of every genre, learn where it came from. Even if you don't ever plan on playing it, learn the language. Number two, if you're young, practice as much as you can, because you'll never have that time to do that as you get older. So put your head down and head down, horns out, and just practice like crazy. But I think the most important, well, maybe not the most important, I think listening to music's the most important, but really important point here, you cannot learn how to play the drums online. You need a teacher. You need that coach. I mean, Tiger Woods at the top of his game had a swing coach. Jose Canseco, when he was a home run champ, still had a batting coach, right? If these guys that are making millions of dollars and are considered the best athletes in the world can have a coach, so can you. If you need to think of them as a coach as opposed to a teacher, then think of them as a coach. But you always need somebody who's objective and is willing to tell you the truth about you in your corner.
And that's really good advice. I mean, that's great advice out there. And even some of the greatest singers in the world, I mean, some guys that I just absolutely idolize, Steven Tyler from Aerosmith.
Yep.
Freak of nature. The man is probably 70 now and he still sounds the same,
Yep.
But he has a vocal coach on the road with him every day. And he goes into the shower and turns on hot water and gets steam going to open up his vocal cords. And he does a vocal warm up every night before he hits the stage.
Absolutely. You need a coach. I mean, just real quick here, one of my students, he's an international touring drummer that just happens to live in the same town that I live in. But he's played with some pretty big bands, metal guy. And he is one of my students, and he came to me to help him fix his technique and kind of coach him along because he was getting sore after every show. He was icing his hands. I mean, here's a guy that's playing in front of 80 to 100,000 people at festivals, and he's coming for drum lessons. Like, he doesn't need to come for drum lessons. He's a hell of a player. But he knows that he can get better, and he knows that, I'm going to be objective and tell him the truth and help him along his way. If he can do that, man, everybody should be doing it. I still go for drum lessons. You know what I mean? I mean, I only go like once a year, but I still go.
Right.
It's important. If you want to get to that level, you're never going to do it watching YouTube.
That's true.
Yeah,
I do know. And I think we as drummers need to surround ourselves with other drummers. We're not like guitar players. There's amongst drummers, there's this camaraderie, and I'm not taking anything away from guitar players, but I'm just saying guitar players, tend to have a little bit more of a rivalry aspect.
Yes.
Drummers, it really is this really cool fraternal brotherhood, and we're all rooting for one another, no doubt about it. I think being around other drummers and talking to other drummers, just in the 50 or 55 minutes we've been on the phone tonight, I've learned things from you, Rob. That's what's so important, is to continue gaining knowledge and learning from other people. And, doctors sit and talk to one another and they learn things from one another. We need to make sure we're doing that as drummers, no doubt.
Oh, I agree, man. And it's, drummers are just the coolest.
Aren't we,
really,
though?
I mean, well, no, but it's the truth, man. I mean, like, I've never met a drummer, even like in my formative years when I was going to college and stuff, and you see a guy do something and you're like, what the heck did you just play? I've never seen a drummer go, that's my secret.
Yeah.
I have seen guitar players do that. Like, no, I'm not showing you that lick, man. That's my lick.
Right. Exactly.
I've never, ever seen a drummer do that. I mean, I can remember, I went to college for music performance, and, you'd have all these drum cubicles or small practice rooms, and, you walk by and you're like, oh, man, what was it that you were just working on? Like, that was really cool. And, the guy'd be like, oh, come on in, I'll show it to you, and vice versa. People would walk in on me and, oh, what the heck was that? And, oh, it's this, and here's the sticking, and here's how I'm playing it, right? Like, we're just really cool like that.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, and it is just such a cool brotherhood. And, something that I've learned recently, most of my playing career, I think I'm safe in saying is in my rearview mirror rather than out my windshield. I've been doing this for a long time. I had never been, an endorser of any brands or anything until, 4 or 5 years ago. And, that's kind of how our paths crossed. We both are on the Dream Cymbals artist roster. We're both on the Los Cabos Drumsticks artist roster. That's some of the just great friendships that I've built, being parts of those companies, with the other artists. And it's like, anytime you reach out to one of those guys and say, hey man, I'm on the Los Cabos roster with you, or I'm on the Dream Cymbals artist roster with you, would you come on my podcast? Of course. It's just like, it is such a fraternal brotherhood. And, I keep saying that, but I want to stress that to my listeners that, we have something different than other dudes in bands.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We both just happen to play some of the coolest brands out there. So, there's definitely no doubt about that. There is no doubt about that whatsoever. As a matter of fact, my first guest on this show was Brian LaRue from Dream Cymbals. Yes, I heard that episode. Yeah.
And so I said, if I'm going to start a podcast, I'm going to bring on one of the coolest dudes I know. And of course, I had to reach out to Brian, and, I've had Phil from Los Cabos on here, I've had Josh from Natal Drums. It's just a really cool family atmosphere amongst other drummers, and we're all looking to help each other out. So, Rob, tell our listeners where we can find more information on you.
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook. Just look me up, Robb Ryan with 2 B's, ROBBRYAN. My Facebook page is Robb Ryan Drum Lessons. You can go to www.robbryan.drums.com. And I can't remember my Instagram, so I guess I can't say that. I post to it all the time. I just don't remember what it is.
Well, we will send folks to find you on Instagram as well. I'll ask my daughter here in a little bit. She knows where everybody's at on Instagram these days, I think. So,
you know what? I think it's actually it's at Rhythmic Vocabulary is what it is.
Oh, okay, cool. Cool. All right. Well, we're going to send folks your way. Robb, thanks so much for coming on. It's been super educational for me. Just a monster player. Your technical ability is just incredible. Folks, if you haven't seen the videos that we've referred to, hit Robb up on his website. Just do a quick search on YouTube. It's just amazing to see what our guests can do. So, Robb, thanks so much for taking the time. You're welcome here anytime your schedule allows, sir.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, it was fun.
You're welcome. All right, man. We'll talk to you real quick, okay?
All right. Thanks, man.
All right. See you, Robb. All right, guys and girls, that's going to do it for episode 26 of the Drum Shuffle. Thanks as always for tuning in. We always ask, go ahead and hit the subscribe button to whatever platform you're using to listen in. It helps us tremendously to continue to grow. It's hard for me to believe that we are now 6 months into the Drum Shuffle, and we're just growing by leaps and bounds every week, and that's thanks to every single one of you. Got an email not too long ago asking, what can I do to help? Tell a friend, send a link to somebody. That helps us more than anything. Make sure you tune in next week. We're going to be joined by a great young jazz drummer by the name of Brandon Goodwin. Brandon leads just a fantastic band called Bees. Trust me on that. You're going to want to hear that episode. We've got lots of great guests coming up. Again, thank you for tuning in. We can't do any of this without all of you. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com. You can find more information on me over at jamieeads.com, and we love hearing from you throughout the week at thedrumshufflepodcast@gmail.com. So until next time, may your heads stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers.